Thanks for having me, Sandeep. Yeah, I currently had a security engagement for Prime Video, where I run a program that really works on advanced security controls for various parts of the business. Everything from infrastructure testing and availability around like DDoS bots and scraping, things like data classification and lineage, general like security engineering, AppSec, various kinds of control testing, really about supporting our developers in understanding how to scale security and understanding the controls in place and how they work.
Absolutely, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing that. Hi, everyone. Sandeep here, co-founder and CEO at Deepfence. Mike, thank you so much for making time for this one. Fourth webinar that we're doing in the series of, how top tech tier companies essentially, operationalize security at scale, right? And I think, Mike, that would be the next question. What we've been sort of, at Deepfence, as well as, what we've been seeing in the industry broadly, is the context is the king when it comes to better prioritization. Really, is this whole concept is really sort of much needed concept. It should have been there from day one, but I think we're seeing more and more of that happening. But how do you look at it? Like, what is context? What is even context? How does it help you prioritize, really? And what are the different types of context that one would expect, or one would hold their vendors responsible to, saying that, hey, I know you scan, but every time you scan, you give me 100,000 vulnerabilities. I need, a certain kind of context, certain kind of telemetry that feeds into the scan results to be able to prioritize better. What is it? How do you look at it, Mike?
So yeah, context to me means a bunch of different things, right? There's like, I'm worried about my users, I'm worried about my infrastructure, I'm worried about my data, I'm worried about the metrics of system health and things like that, right? Like, how many requests do we get a day or a minute or an hour? Those all play into context. And I think one of the things that we often miss as security practitioners is we're always worried about the technical context, but we often lose sight of the business context. So, you certainly can have a few services that, maybe aren't the most high volume or don't have all the data or all the most sensitive data, but they're critical to keeping your operation running. So understanding your business and knowing that's kind of part of your context and should be part of your threat model and be prioritized accordingly, is a big deal. And I've seen this a lot, especially in things like the financial services world, where I've been, like, a good example is we had, back in a past life, we had a trading floor with a bunch of traders. And it was really one of those where there was a machine in the corner where they did a bunch of analytics on, which was like this sort of desktop machine. And when we tried to do a DR in an office failure, like, it was like one of those, well, where's my machine? I need all this for all my analytics and data, right? To conduct multi-million-dollar trades. And it's one of those things that also falls below the radar, and you didn't have visibility on it because somebody was kind of doing their own thing in the corner. So that's kind of one example of context. I think another way context matters is how you prioritize and how you scope. So I think of, like, if you're in the DDoS world or you're doing live events, when you see a giant spike of traffic, well, you were expecting that spike of traffic, but were you really expecting at these specific endpoints? Like, is somebody actually trying to target, like an authentication gateway while you're trying to launch, multi-million users for a live event? What does visibility around that look like? And what do you have the right controls? And do the teams know how to identify, good behavior versus things like misuse behavior that isn't arguably bad, but it exploits business logic? So having things like context on business logic matters a lot. And it requires, right? It requires to understand both the technology and the business.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Mike. That I couldn't agree more. In fact, a more critical vulnerability in not a very critical application versus a medium severity vulnerability in a super critical application, that that itself could be a good start, really, right? So once, from a user's point of view, from a DevSecOps practitioner's point of view, once you're done enumerating your cloud, once you're done, doing your asset inventory, and you scan it, you end up with thousands of vulnerabilities. Either you go deep in application business context, like you mentioned, really, right? Like, hey, okay, this is my critical service because it's processing payment, or it could be anything of that sort. Applications/business context, number one. Data context. Hey, this particular application is really interfacing with this particular database, and I can't afford a vulnerability there. Could be network context, could be one other thing, really, right? And ultimately identity of some sort. Cloud user, maybe it could be tokens, API keys, and stuff like that. Is that a good way to sort of articulate this from a user's point of view, saying that, okay, I got my inventories done, I got my scan results done, but I'm going to use context from one or more of these areas, or deeper telemetry from one or more of these areas, to filter down, to prioritize and focus on those top 10 attack paths that might be arising because of what I've seen in application behavior, or that might be arising because of how the proximity to critical data and stuff like that. Is that a set of prisms I should have as a user?
100%, 100%. And I think it
Mhm.
often ends up weighted, where I would say a medium vulnerability or even a low exposed to the internet, I'm more concerned about than if I have a regex vulnerability again in a library that's part of an internal data analytics engine that feeds our recommendations engine, or people that work on recommendations or non high risk paths. Like, yeah. So right, that's all how context plays into this. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing where context is really interesting are things like, well, is it mass exploitable? So something like, well, yeah, this is not good, but if the likelihood of it happening is only maybe once or twice versus a small thing that if it happens in 100 places or 1,000,000 places, yeah. How we clean that up, or how you detect it. Like, if you don't have good answers to those, a low thing probably needs to be prioritized higher.
Yeah, absolutely. Just the fact that, hey, this particular vulnerability is ubiquitous, and you know what, the exploit payload is available on open internet. That itself could sort of feed into the prioritization engine. Absolutely, that makes total sense, Mike.
Listen to the full webinar at deepfence.io/resources.